"Daddy, where are you?" The small voice cracked through the noise of the mall, like something fragile breaking under pressure, and Lily Harper felt it before she fully heard it. A sharp pull in her chest that made her slow her steps, even though she really didn't have time to stop. Not today. Not when she had exactly $12.68 left in her wallet and a grocery list that didn't fit that number no matter how many times she tried to rearrange it in her head. Not when the rent was already 3 days late and her phone buzzed every few hours with another reminder she couldn't afford to answer. But the sound came again, softer this time. A hiccuping sob followed by a quiet, confused "Daddy." And that was enough to make her turn, because no one called like that unless they were scared, really scared, the kind that made adults uncomfortable and children invisible at the same time. And sure enough, a little boy stood near one of the polished marble columns just outside a high-end clothing store, his tiny hands clenched into fists at his sides, his face blotchy and red, tears streaking down his cheeks as people passed him without slowing down, glancing once, maybe twice, then looking away like it wasn't their responsibility, like it wasn't easier to pretend they hadn't seen anything at all. And Lily hesitated for a second, just one, because she knew better than to get involved in situations that could turn messy, knew how quickly kindness could be misunderstood, especially when you looked like she did in a worn coat and scuffed shoes that told their own story before she even spoke. But then the boy let out another broken cry, his voice thinner now, more desperate, and something in her gave in, the same part of her that always did, the part that had never quite learned how to walk away. So she exhaled slowly, tightening her grip on the reusable shopping bag in her hand before stepping toward him, her movements careful, non-threatening, as if approaching a frightened animal that might bolt at any second. "Hey, it's okay," she said gently, crouching down to his level so she wouldn't loom over him, her voice soft but steady despite the way her own heart was starting to race, because she could already feel the eyes beginning to settle on her, the subtle shift in attention that came when someone finally broke the invisible rule of not getting involved. "Are you lost?" The boy looked up at her, his big eyes glassy with tears, his lower lip trembling as he tried to speak, but only managed another shaky breath. And Lily felt that pull again, sharper now, as she reached into her bag and pulled out a small pack of tissues she'd been saving, offering one to him with a reassuring smile. "Here, take this," she said, and after a brief hesitation, he did, his tiny fingers brushing against hers as he wiped at his face, still sniffling, still searching the crowd behind her like he expected someone to appear at any moment, someone who clearly hadn't yet. "Daddy was here," he finally whispered, his voice uneven. He said wait, but he didn't come back, and Lily's chest tightened because she'd heard versions of that sentence before, not always from children, not always said out loud, but always carrying the same quiet hurt underneath, the same question no one wanted to answer. And she forced herself to stay calm, to keep her tone light even as she glanced around, scanning for any sign of a frantic parent or a security guard already on the way. But all she saw were shoppers and sales associates, people absorbed in their own lives, their own priorities, their own carefully curated worlds. And for a brief moment, she considered walking away again, telling herself it wasn't her place, that someone else would handle it, someone who looked more like they belonged here, someone who wouldn't be immediately questioned for simply caring. But the boy shifted, closer to her instead, as if he'd already decided she was safe, as if that choice had been made the second she knelt down, and just like that, leaving wasn't an option anymore. "Okay," she murmured, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "Then we'll wait together, all right? I'm right here." And as she said it, she didn't notice the subtle flicker of movement from one of the security cameras mounted high above, didn't see the way the lens adjusted ever so slightly, focusing in, capturing everything, or the man standing in a quiet office 2 floors above, watching the scene unfold on a wall of screens, his expression unreadable as his gaze locked onto the woman kneeling beside his son, because Lily Harper had no idea that she wasn't just comforting a lost child in the middle of a busy afternoon. She was being watched, studied, and silently judged by someone who had already begun to change everything about her life without saying a single word. The boy's fingers curled instinctively around the edge of Lily's sleeve, as if letting go would make her disappear the same way his father had, and she felt the small, fragile weight of that trust settle over her shoulders, heavier than anything she had carried all day, heavier even than the quiet anxiety that had been following her since morning, because she was not supposed to be here right now, not kneeling on a polished floor in a mall where everything cost more than she could afford, not comforting a stranger's child when she still had her own problems stacked one on top of the other like unpaid bills. And yet she stayed, shifting slightly, so she was more comfortable on one knee, her bag resting beside her as she glanced again at the people passing by, hoping someone would step forward and say they recognized the boy, that they were looking for him, that this situation had an easy ending, but no one did. And the boy sniffled again, pressing closer as if the space between them felt too wide. "What is your name?" she asked gently, brushing a stray tear from his cheek with careful fingers, the kind of movement that came naturally even though she had never had a child of her own. And he hesitated for a moment before answering in a small, uneven voice, "Noah," and she smiled softly, nodding like that was the most important piece of information she could have received. "Okay, Noah, I am Lily," she said, keeping her tone warm and steady. "And I am not going anywhere, all right? We are going to figure this out." But even as she said it, her mind flickered back to the grocery list folded inside her pocket, to the numbers she had gone over again and again until they blurred together, to the reality that every minute she spent here was another minute she was not solving the problems waiting for her outside these glass doors. And still she did not move, because Noah's grip tightened just slightly, as if he sensed that hesitation, as if he was afraid she might change her mind, and she could not do that to him, not when his eyes kept scanning the crowd with that same hopeful desperation that was slowly starting to fade, replaced by something quieter, something more uncertain. "Did your dad tell you to stay right here?" she asked, trying to gather whatever details she could, and Noah nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand in a way that made Lily's heart ache just a little more. "He said he would come back fast," he whispered, and she swallowed, forcing herself to keep her expression calm even as a familiar thought crept in, the kind that always came uninvited, the kind that whispered that sometimes people did not come back as fast as they promised, sometimes they did not come back at all. But she pushed that thought away immediately, because this was not her story to project onto his, and he deserved better than that. "Then he will," she said firmly, offering him a reassuring nod as if her confidence alone could make it true. And for a brief second, Noah seemed to believe her, his shoulders relaxing just enough for his breathing to steady, and Lily exhaled quietly, feeling the tension in her own chest ease just a fraction, until she noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere around them, the kind that was hard to explain but impossible to ignore. A few more glances lingering a little longer than before, a woman slowing down as she passed, her expression tightening with suspicion, a man pausing near the storefront, as if debating whether to step in, and Lily straightened slightly, suddenly aware of how this must look from the outside. A woman who did not belong in this place kneeling beside a well-dressed child who was clearly not hers, and the realization sent a small ripple of unease through her, because kindness, she had learned, was not always seen as kindness. Sometimes it was questioned, sometimes it was doubted, and sometimes it was mistaken for something else entirely. And as she gently adjusted the collar of Noah's jacket, trying to make him more comfortable, she could not shake the feeling that whatever happened next was not going to be as simple as just waiting for his father to return. Noah's breathing slowly evened out, but his fingers never loosened their grip on Lily's sleeve, as if he had already decided she was the only steady thing in a place that suddenly felt too big and too unfamiliar, and Lily let him hold on, shifting slightly so she could sit more comfortably on the edge of a nearby bench, guiding him gently to sit beside her instead of standing alone in the open where every passing glance seemed to linger a little too long. "Hey," she said softly, tilting her head just enough to catch his eyes again. "How about we take a deep breath together, okay? In and out, just like this." And she demonstrated slowly, exaggerating the motion just enough for him to follow. And after a moment, he did, his small chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm before gradually settling into something calmer, something safer, and Lily offered a small smile, the kind that did not ask for anything in return. "That is better," she murmured, brushing a loose strand of hair behind his ear, noticing now how neatly dressed he was, how his jacket was clearly expensive, how his shoes were clean despite the polished floor beneath them. Details that made the situation feel even more out of place, because children like Noah did not usually get left behind. Not here, not like this. And yet here he was, leaning into her side as if he had known her longer than a few minutes. "Are you hungry?" she asked quietly, even though she already knew she should not be offering anything, not when every dollar mattered. Not when she had spent the last week calculating meals down to the smallest detail, but Noah nodded almost immediately, his eyes dropping as if he felt guilty for it. And that was all it took, because Lily had never been good at saying no to someone who needed something simple, something basic, something she could give even when she had so little. So she reached into her bag again and pulled out a small granola bar she had planned to save for later, hesitating for only a fraction of a second before unwrapping it and handing it to him. "Here," she said gently. "It is not much, but it will help." And Noah accepted it with both hands, his movements careful, almost polite in a way that made her chest tighten again, because even in this moment, he was trying not to take up too much space, trying not to be a problem, and she watched as he took a small bite, then another, his shoulders relaxing further with each one. And for a brief moment, everything felt quieter, simpler, like maybe this would resolve itself without complication, like maybe his father would appear any second and thank her and take him home. But that feeling did not last, because the same woman who had slowed down earlier was now standing a few feet away, her expression sharper, more certain, and Lily felt it immediately, that shift from curiosity to suspicion. The way the woman's gaze moved from Noah to Lily and back again, lingering on. The way he sat close to her, the way he held the granola bar she had given him, and Lily straightened slightly, her instincts already preparing for what might come next, because she had seen this before, in smaller ways, in quieter moments. The assumption that did not need to be spoken out loud to be understood, and sure enough, the woman stepped closer, her voice polite, but edged with something firmer underneath. "Excuse me," she said, glancing down at Noah before fixing her eyes on Lily. "Is this your child?" And for a split second, Lily felt the entire situation tighten around her like a thread being pulled too quickly, because she knew that whatever she said next would not just be an answer, it would be a judgment, a decision already half made before she even opened her mouth. And beside her, Noah's hand tightened again, his small voice barely audible as he whispered, "Please do not go," as if he already sensed that everything was about to change. The question hung in the air for a second longer than it should have, and Lily could feel the weight of it settling over everything. The way conversations nearby seemed to quiet just enough for people to listen without appearing obvious, and she drew in a slow breath, keeping her voice calm even as her pulse picked up. "No," she said gently, shaking her head once. "He is not my child. He is waiting for his father. He said his dad asked him to stay here." And the woman's eyes narrowed slightly, not convinced, her gaze flicking down to Noah, then back to Lily, as if measuring the distance between them, the closeness that had formed in just a few minutes. "Then why is he with you?" she pressed, her tone polite but edged. Now, carrying that quiet authority of someone who believed they were stepping in for the right reasons, and Lily felt that familiar tension tighten in her chest. The one that came from knowing the truth did not always sound convincing when it came from the wrong person, because he was alone and crying. She replied simply, her hand resting lightly on Noah's shoulder in a steadying gesture more for him than for herself. "I did not want to leave him like that." And for a moment, there was silence, the kind that felt like it could tilt either way, understanding or suspicion, and Lily held her ground, meeting the woman's gaze without defensiveness, without raising her voice, because she knew that any sign of agitation would only make things worse. But the woman's expression did not soften. If anything, it hardened, her lips pressing together as she glanced around, catching the attention of a man standing nearby. "I think we should get security," she said under her breath, not quietly enough to go unheard. And Lily felt the shift immediately, the subtle but unmistakable escalation, the moment when a simple misunderstanding began to turn into something more complicated, something harder to explain away. And beside her, Noah stiffened, his small hand gripping her sleeve again as he looked up at her with wide eyes, the earlier calm beginning to crack. "Am I in trouble?" he whispered. his voice trembling just enough to make Lily's heart twist, and she shook her head. Quickly, leaning down so she was closer to him, her voice low and reassuring. No, you are not in trouble, okay? None of this is your fault, she said, keeping her tone steady even as she felt the situation slipping out of her control, because now more people were watching, their curiosity sharpened by the word security, their attention drawn like magnets to something that felt out of place, and Lily became acutely aware of how she must look in their eyes, a stranger with a child who clearly belonged to a different world, a different life, and she straightened again, turning back to the woman before things could spiral further. Listen, she said carefully, choosing her words with precision, we can go to the information desk together, or we can ask someone to make an announcement. I just stayed because he needed help. But the woman did not respond right away, her attention already shifting past Lily to someone approaching from the side, a uniformed mall employee walking briskly toward them, his expression professional but alert, and Lily exhaled slowly, knowing that this was exactly what she had hoped to avoid, not because she had done anything wrong, but because situations like this rarely depended on what was right. They depended on what people believed, and belief was not always fair. And as the employee came to a stop a few feet away, glancing between Lily and Noah before addressing her directly, "Ma'am, is everything okay here?" Lily felt Noah's grip tighten once more, his small voice barely audible as he whispered, "Please do not let them take me." And for the first time since she had stopped, Lily realized this was no longer just about waiting for a father to return. Something else was unfolding, something she could not yet see, but could already feel pressing in from all sides. High above the polished floors and carefully arranged storefronts, the quiet hum of monitors filled a private control room where every corner of the mall was displayed in perfect clarity, and Alexander Reed stood motionless in front of the largest screen, his gaze fixed on the exact moment unfolding below. The image of Lily Harper kneeling beside his son frozen in a frame of stillness that did not match the tension building around her, and for a long second, he said nothing, his expression unreadable as he watched the interaction replay from multiple angles, the way she had approached slowly, the way she had lowered herself to Noah's level instead of towering over him, the way she had offered something small without hesitation even when it was clear she did not have much to give, and beside him, a security supervisor shifted uneasily, glancing between the screen and the man who owned not just the building but nearly everything connected to it. "Sir, we can have someone remove her immediately if you think." "No," Alexander said quietly, cutting him off without raising his voice, his eyes never leaving the screen. And there was something in the way he said it that made the room fall completely silent, because this was not indifference. This was deliberate, calculated restraint, the kind that came from someone who did not act without purpose. And he leaned forward slightly, resting one hand against the edge of the console as the footage shifted to the live feed again, capturing Lily's calm response to the employee, the way she kept her voice steady even as suspicion grew around her, the way she stayed focused on Noah instead of defending herself. And something in that detail held his attention longer than it should have, longer than logic required, because most people, when questioned, reacted to protect themselves first. But she had not. She had remained anchored to the child, as if his fear mattered more than her own discomfort, and Alexander exhaled slowly, a subtle shift in his posture betraying a thought forming beneath the surface. "How long has she been there?" he asked, his tone measured, and the supervisor quickly checked the system. "Approximately 11 minutes, sir." She approached the child within 30 seconds of him being alone, and Alexander nodded once, absorbing that without comment, his gaze sharpening just slightly as the scene below escalated. The employee speaking, the woman lingering nearby, the attention building like a quiet storm that had not yet broken. And still, Noah stayed close to her, not pulling away, not reaching for anyone else. And that detail alone was enough to hold Alexander in place, because trust like that did not form instantly without reason. Children did not cling to strangers unless something about them felt safe, and he knew his son well enough to recognize that, even from a distance, even through a screen. "Sir, should we alert the father?" the supervisor asked carefully, unaware of how loaded that question actually was, and for a fraction of a second, Alexander did not respond, his eyes fixed on the image of Noah gripping Lily's sleeve as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, his expression changed, not softer, not warmer, but more focused, more intent, as if the situation had shifted from a simple security concern into something else entirely, something worth watching just a little longer. Not yet, he said finally, his voice calm but decisive, and the supervisor blinked in slight confusion before nodding, stepping back without another word, because when Alexander Reed made a decision, it was rarely questioned. And down below, completely unaware of the eyes tracking her every movement, Lily Harper sat beside a child who did not want to let go, surrounded by people who were beginning to doubt her, while the one person who could have ended it all with a single step forward chose instead to wait, to observe, to test something he had not yet fully defined. Because for the first time in a long while, Alexander was not just seeing a situation that needed control, he was watching a person who might change something he had stopped believing in, and he was not ready to interrupt that just yet. The employee's presence seemed to solidify the invisible line that had been forming around Lily, turning quiet suspicion into something more official, more difficult to navigate. And she could feel it in the way people slowed their steps just enough to watch, in the way Noah pressed closer to her side, his small fingers tightening again around her sleeve, as if the fabric itself could anchor him in place. "Ma'am, I am going to need you to step away from the child for a moment," the employee said, his tone professional but firm, and Lily's heart skipped, not from fear for herself, but from the immediate reaction she felt beside her. Noah shaking his head quickly, his voice rising in a soft panic. "No, please, do not go," and Lily turned to him instinctively, her voice lowering as she leaned closer. "Hey, it is okay. I am still right here," she said, though she knew the request was not something she could simply ignore, because this was no longer just about helping. This had become a situation being judged from the outside, and perception mattered more than intent in moments like this, so she straightened slowly, careful not to pull away too abruptly. "I am not trying to cause any trouble," she explained calmly, meeting the employee's eyes. He was alone and crying. "I stayed so he would not be by himself." But the employee's expression remained cautious, his attention shifting briefly to Noah before returning to Lily. "We understand, but we need to verify the situation. There have been concerns raised," he replied, and the words "concerns raised" carried more weight than they should have, making the space feel smaller, tighter, as if everything was closing in just a little more, and Lily nodded once, swallowing the frustration that tried to rise, because arguing would only make things worse. "Then let us find his father," she said simply, her voice steady even as she felt the eyes on her growing heavier. "We can make an announcement or check with security. I am not leaving him alone." And that last part slipped out more firmly than she intended, not defensive, but resolute, because the idea of stepping away completely, of watching him be taken somewhere unfamiliar while he was already scared, did not sit right with her, not after the way he had looked at her, not after the way he had asked her not to go. And for a moment, the employee hesitated, caught between protocol and the reality in front of him. But before he could respond, the woman from earlier spoke again, her voice sharper now. "He clearly does not belong with her," she said, not bothering to lower her tone this time. And a few nearby heads turned more openly, drawn into the tension like it was something they were allowed to witness, and Lily felt the sting of that statement more than she expected, not because it was entirely unexpected, but because it was said with such certainty, such quiet dismissal, as if she had already been defined without a single fact being confirmed. And beside her, Noah's breathing began to quicken again, his earlier calm unraveling as he looked between the adults, confusion and fear mixing in his expression. "I want my dad," he said, louder this time, his voice cracking just enough to cut through the noise around them. And Lily felt that pull again, stronger now, the instinct to protect, to steady, to keep him from feeling alone in the middle of all this. So she reached for his hand gently, ignoring the way it might be perceived, because in that moment, his fear mattered more than anything else. "We are going to find him," she said softly, holding his gaze, anchoring him the only way she knew how. But even as she said it, the situation was already shifting again, the employee lifting a hand to his radio, speaking quietly into it, and somewhere above them, unseen and unheard. The man who had chosen to watch instead of act finally straightened, his decision no longer passive. Because what had started as observation was quickly becoming something he could not ignore, and below, Lily had no idea that the next moment would change the direction of everything. She only knew that the child beside her was afraid, and that she was not ready to walk away. The soft crackle of the employee's radio seemed louder than it should have been, echoing in the tense space between them as Lily felt Noah's hand tremble in hers, his small fingers clutching tighter as if he already sensed something was about to shift. And before the employee could say another word, a new presence cut through the growing circle of attention, not loud, not rushed, but unmistakably commanding. "That will not be necessary," the voice said, calm and even, yet carrying enough authority to still the moment almost instantly, and Lily turned instinctively, her breath catching slightly as she saw the man approaching, tall, composed, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that seemed to belong to a different world than the one she was standing in. His steps measured, his gaze steady, and there was something about the way people reacted to him, the subtle straightening of posture, the immediate silence that followed, that made it clear he was not just another bystander stepping in. And beside her, Noah froze for a fraction of a second before his entire expression changed, the fear in his eyes breaking into something else entirely, something like relief. "Dad," he whispered, the word barely audible, but carrying more weight than anything else that had been said, and Lily's grip loosened just slightly as she processed it, her eyes flicking back to the man who had now stopped just a few feet away, his attention moving first to his son, taking in the tear-streaked face, the way he stood close to Lily, and then to her, not with immediate gratitude, not with suspicion either, but with something far more difficult to read, something measured, deliberate, as if he was assessing not just what had happened, but who she was. "Noah," he said quietly, his voice softer now, and the boy moved toward him instinctively, though he hesitated halfway, glancing back at Lily as if unsure whether to let go completely, and that small hesitation did not go unnoticed, not by Lily, not by the employee, and certainly not by the man standing in front of them, and for a brief second, the entire situation seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break the tension. "Are you all right?" the man asked, crouching slightly to meet his son's eye level, his tone controlled but carrying an undercurrent that suggested he had already seen more than he was saying. And Noah nodded quickly, his voice still uneven. "I waited, like you said, but you did not come back." And the words hung there, simple and honest in a way that made Lily's chest tighten again, because children did not filter disappointment the way adults did. And the man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not enough for most to notice, but enough for Lily to catch a flicker of something beneath the surface, something that looked almost like regret, before it disappeared behind composure once more. And then his gaze returned to her, sharper now, more direct. "You stayed with him," he said, not a question, but not quite a statement either, and Lily straightened slightly, aware that every eye was still on them, that whatever she said next would carry weight she had not asked for. He was alone. She replied simply, her voice calm despite everything. "I could not just walk away." And for a moment, the silence returned, thicker this time, as if the air itself was waiting for his reaction. And when he spoke again, his tone did not soften, did not immediately offer thanks. Instead, it carried a different kind of weight, one that caught Lily off guard. "Most people would have," he said, his eyes holding hers with a quiet intensity. "So tell me, why did you not?" And the question landed between them like something heavier than it should have been, not accusatory, not kind, but probing, deliberate, as if he was testing something she could not yet see. And around them, the tension shifted again, no longer just about suspicion or misunderstanding, but something deeper, something that had not been there before. And Lily realized in that moment that this was not over, not even close. Because whatever this man was looking for, whatever answer he expected, it was not as simple as the truth she had already given, and for reasons she could not explain, she had the feeling that how she responded now would change everything. For a brief moment, Lily did not answer, not because she did not have one, but because she could feel the weight behind his question, the way it was not really asking about the situation but about her, about something deeper that he was trying to understand, and she met his gaze steadily, not defensive, not intimidated, just honest in a way that felt almost out of place in a moment like this. Because he needed someone, she said quietly, her voice even but carrying a simple certainty that did not try to impress or explain beyond what was true. And I was there. And the answer seemed almost too small for the tension surrounding them, too straightforward for the kind of scrutiny in his eyes. But she did not add anything else, did not justify it further, because there was nothing more to say. And beside her, Noah shifted again, his small hand still holding onto the fabric of her sleeve, his eyes moving between the two adults as if trying to understand what was happening. And then, without warning, he stepped back toward Lily instead of fully going to his father, pressing lightly against her side, as if the instinct to stay close to her had not faded just because his father had arrived. And that single movement changed everything in a way that no one could ignore. Not the employee, not the woman who had raised concern, and certainly not the man standing in front of them. Because children did not choose distance from their parents without reason, and they did not choose closeness with strangers without feeling something they could not explain. And for a second, Alexander's expression shifted again, more noticeable this time, his gaze dropping briefly to where Noah stood before returning to Lily, sharper now, more focused, as if her presence had become something undeniable rather than incidental. "Noah," he said, his tone controlled, but there was a subtle pause before he continued, "Come here." And the boy hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, his grip tightening again before slowly loosening, his small steps carrying him back toward his father, though his eyes remained on Lily as if he was not entirely ready to let the moment end. And Lily felt that pull again, that instinct to reassure, but she stopped herself this time, letting her hand fall back to her side, because this was where she was supposed to step away. This was where her part ended, even if it did not feel finished. And the employee shifted his stance, clearly waiting for some acknowledgement from the man who had now taken control of the situation. But instead of addressing him, Alexander's attention remained on Lily, studying her in a way that made the space feel smaller again, more focused. "You gave him your food," he said, his voice low enough that it did not carry far, but clear enough that she could not mistake it. And Lily blinked slightly, caught off guard by the detail, because she had not expected him to notice something so small. "It was just a granola bar," she replied, her tone simple, almost dismissive, as if it had not mattered, as if it had not been a choice at all. And for a second, there was something almost unreadable in his expression, something that did not match the composed exterior he carried so effortlessly. And then the moment shifted again, the weight of attention from others still lingering, the expectation that something more would be said, something formal, something that would close the situation. But instead, Lily took a small step back, creating distance where there had been none before, her voice calm but final. "He is safe now," she said, not looking for gratitude, not waiting for permission. "That is what matters." And as she turned, slightly, preparing to leave, Noah's voice broke through again, softer this time, but filled with something that made her pause despite herself. "Will you come back?" he asked, the question simple but heavy in a way that made her chest tighten. And Lily hesitated for just a fraction of a second, caught between what she wanted to say and what she knew she should not promise, because some moments were not meant to continue. Some connections existed only in the space they were created, and she looked back at him, offering a small, gentle smile that held more meaning than words. But before she could answer, the man's voice came again, calm, controlled, but carrying a weight that stopped everything from moving forward. "Wait," he said. And this time, it was not a request. It was something else entirely, something that made it clear that whatever this was, it was not over yet. Lily stopped mid-step, the simple motion of leaving suddenly interrupted by a single word that carried more weight than it should have. And for a brief second, she considered ignoring it, continuing forward and letting the moment end exactly where it was supposed to, because she had done what she came here to do, even if she had never planned to do it. Even if it had cost her time she could not afford. But something in his tone made her pause, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but out of a quiet instinct that told her this was not just a passing interaction anymore. And she turned back slowly, meeting his gaze once more as the space around them seemed to narrow, the attention of others still lingering but no longer as sharp, as if even they could sense that something had shifted beyond their understanding. and Alexander Reed stood there with the same composed presence. But now there was something more deliberate in the way he looked at her, something that suggested he had already made a decision before speaking again. "I have been watching you," he said, his voice calm, controlled, and unmistakably direct, and the words landed differently than anything else he had said, because they carried a truth she had not expected, a reality she had not seen, and Lily's brows knit slightly in confusion, her mind catching up to the implication behind it. "Watching," she repeated quietly, not defensive, just trying to understand, and he nodded once, his gaze steady. "From the moment you walked toward him," he clarified, and for a brief second, the entire situation rearranged itself in her mind. The timing, the attention, the way things had escalated and yet never fully spiraled out of control, and she realized that this had never been as random as it seemed, not entirely, and before she could respond, he continued, his tone unchanged but his words carrying more intention now. "Most people would have walked past," he said again, echoing his earlier statement. "Some would have called for help, but they would not have stayed, not like you did." And Lily felt a flicker of something unfamiliar at the edge of that observation. Not praise, not exactly, but recognition, the kind that did not come easily. And she shifted her weight slightly, her voice still steady. "I did not think about it that way," she replied honestly. "I just did not want him to feel alone." And for a moment, silence followed. But this time it was different, not tense, not uncertain, but filled with something unspoken, something building. And then Alexander's gaze moved briefly to Noah, who was now standing close to him but still looking back at Lily, his expression quieter, calmer, yet still holding on to that same connection that had formed between them. And when Alexander looked back at her, there was no hesitation in what he said next. "Come work for me," he said, the words simple, direct, but carrying a weight that immediately shifted everything. And Lily blinked, caught off guard not by the idea itself, but by how suddenly it had been placed in front of her. "I am sorry," she said, almost instinctively, as if she needed to hear it again to make sense of it. And he did not repeat himself, he only clarified, his tone unchanged. "I run this place," he said, gesturing slightly around them, not as a boast, but as a fact, "and I need people who do not walk away when something matters." And the statement hung there, heavy with implication, because this was not about a job in the way most offers were. It was about something else, something she could not fully define yet, and Lily hesitated, not immediately accepting, not immediately refusing, because her life was not something that could be changed with a single sentence, not when she had responsibilities, realities, limitations that did not disappear just because an opportunity appeared. And she glanced briefly at Noah, then back at him, her voice quieter now, but still grounded. "You do not even know me," she said, not challenging, just stating the truth. And for the first time, something almost like a faint shift of expression touched his features, not quite a smile, but not entirely neutral either. "I know enough," he replied, and that answer carried its own weight, because it suggested that what he had seen mattered more than anything she could say, more than any background or explanation. And for a moment, Lily felt the ground beneath her shift in a way she had not expected when she walked into the mall that day, because nothing about this had been planned, nothing about this fit into the life she had been trying to manage just hours ago. And yet here she was, standing in front of a man who had watched her without her knowing, offering something that could change everything. And she realized then that this was not just a moment that would pass. It was the beginning of something she had not yet chosen, but could not simply ignore. And as she stood there, caught between what she knew and what she did not, the question was no longer whether she should have stopped to help a child. It was whether she was ready for what came after.